participation, especially for our learning or financial aspect of the other is you competency-based, but competency-based actually has this great capacity to speed up, but it also has the opportunity to slow down. And I wondered if you thought about, or what we do with things like assessment or reactivating progress when we slow down the model.
That is not addressed in the report, but really great point. I'd be happy to look into that and bring back some recommendations.
I think this is an incredibly important area, and there's some structural things that I think need us in making this as effective as I think it could be.
I was wondering, there's a fair amount of literature on the pros and cons of competency-based education, and there's some recognition that not every field is very suitable for that type of educational program. But have you seen literature that actually defines more clearly what people mean by competency? Because I'm thinking about, I've seen some apprenticeship programs where the thing is not that apprentices can do this once. It's they do it numerous times, and it's the repetition of it that they develop the actual skill. I wanted to go to a different level. I wouldn't want to have the nurse that they basically put in a breathing tube once successfully, being certified that he or she is competent in that area. A lot of programs, repetition and developing more skill is competency. Has there been much discussion of what competency actually is?
Commissioner Devlin, I haven't seen a lot of research on defining competency. The default seems to be defined by the program. So apprenticeship is a great example. They leave it up to the apprenticeship and training committee to decide that. So the employers and the employees are deciding together how many times you have to skills to be competent. I think it's very individual based on the program.
I have two questions. First, I couldn't tell from the report or from what you said. Clearly, the legislation requires us to report on where are we and what are the barriers. I'm not as clear on how much of a push are we having? Do we want to have? Do we have any short or long-term goals with this? Does the legislature, are we just saying, well, this is the universe legislature, but I'm not sure where we're going with this. That's my first question. Then I have a different question.
As Chair Rowe, I asked the same question. I think we don't have clarity from the legislature on that, and I would look to the commission to say, here's.
I mean, if this is a report, then sort of what purpose is it supposed to be serving?
There's always a risk of mischaracterizing legislative history, as we only know a part of it, right? Some of it happens behind closed doors, and even the parts that we know or that are public, we may only not fully remember or appreciate. But this topic was of particular interest to former Representative Peter Buckley, and it was of particular interest to the former leadership at Southern Oregon University. And the bill, the 2019 bill really was a product, I think, of that effort that created the pilot, the $200,000 pilot, really was the result, I think, of that particular push. Leadership and priorities at SOU have changed. Representative Buckley no longer serves in the legislature. That being said, I don't want to suggest that the topic of competency-based education is just a provincial sort of a subject that's been a topic over decades of sort of considerable attention by a lot of folks in K-12 and higher education. There are a lot of advocates for it. But to speak just to the legislative expectations, I think if we were to ask the 90 current legislators, only, I don't know, 60 of whom are going to return, or maybe fewer than that, and there's so much turnover, I think you'd get very few even sort of nods of recognition about this particular report and this particular project. And I think that's, sort of reflected in what you see, which is like, well, we're doing what we were asked to do. It's certainly an interesting and important topic, but we're maybe a little bit adrift in terms of legislative direction and attention.
Is there a way to clarify that this session or before we do another report, or to find out if there is momentum or if there is a desire for momentum on this?
I would suggest that at this point, this would be the type of topic, and it's not the first time, where I think you should look to the commission to establish whether we think there should be sort of direction and momentum. And that may be advised by a group that includes institutional leaders, obviously HECC staff and others. Is this something we really want to work on as a state? Right? Because again, I think if we ask the legislature to answer that question for us, I don't know that we'll get a very helpful answer. If I were a legislator, I'd say, well, what do you think? You're the Higher Education Commission, right? What's your expectation for the development of competency-based education within Oregon higher education? So I think this is a topic where the commission could direct HECC staff to sort of bring back a recommendation to you about what our posture ought to be. Is this something we ought to be in subsequent cycles, going to legislature and really trying to invigorate with funding, going to institutions? I think you'll see when you compare this with credit for prior learning, there's quite a bit more energy right now, legislative and commission and institutional, around moving a credit for prior learning approach. But competency-based education is still, it's kind of fringy, I think would be my sense, to use a technical term.
Make sure I put that. Vice Chair Rowe, there will be hopefully some projects going forward out of the $200,000 as well, and we'll get some insight from institutions about where they think that can inform certainly the commission.
As part of that, then that ties to my second question. Maybe I'll make it a point instead of a question. In addition to, you talked about the barriers, if there's something desired about the barriers of the funding formula. I'd also like to know nationally, if we are going to look at this, what the more of the other states, landscape in other states is, what they see as barriers. Is this something, for instance, that even if we as a commission decided we wanted to support it, faculties would rise up in anger and say, no, this isn't a good thing. So what are the substantial barriers or disadvantages, arguments against pushing harder on this as opposed to the credit for prior? Separate from. Thank you.
Thank you. I have any other?
May I just make one comment, and I think it's really in line, and thank you, Chair, with Commissioner Rowe and Commissioner Hammond. It's one of the pieces that I fear with the competency-based education also is that, I think sometimes we have a hard time moving students through to degree completion. And unless we're also tracking when students fall off, if they have an expanded timeline of completing courses, if there's also a way to track how students fall off that could actually just be another gap. Unless we're really measuring unless we're actually capturing data and all of the ways we need to capture data to figure out whether or not this is kind of a fruitful path to go down. I really am concerned about how students might be trapped.
Interesting. My sense is that this is an important area for us to pursue, and I think take some leadership on, and on a couple of reasons, or maybe multiple reasons. We heard yesterday, or this morning, one of the dilemmas in terms of outcomes and how we measure success at the community college level was
students who are in programs, the technical programs, who go out on an internship, get hired and don't complete their certificate or their degree. It seems like there's a definition gap there. If you don't get hired unless you're competent at doing what they want you to do, is there an opportunity to come together with our partners in the field, because they're really the ones who are defining competencies, and if they're hiring people, then maybe that's a pretty good measure of what the competency is. And we'd like to see the opportunity to complete either degree programs or certificate programs. And if that completion can be accomplished through some recognition that they have gained that competency, all the better. Another issue, and this may be more on the credit for prior learning side, but a lot of immigrants who come to this country come with high skill sets, and whether it's being a teacher or a nurse or some other profession, and their credentials don't work here in this country. And competency-based education may have a place to align not just the skill sets, but the language for the skill set in a new setting. And I don't know what that conversation might be in terms of recognizing the really high value that people bring, and then they end up not being able to use that skill in this country is very regrettable for everyone concerned, not just them, but for our economy, for our well-being as a country, a whole range of issues. Another, I'd like to just mention the work of the Adult Learning Subcommittee and the credentials that work. This is another opportunity where competency-based learning is discussed a lot, and how we align our policy-wise our appreciation for high-value credentials and how those are achieved. And I just think there's some synergy in those conversations. And finally, my sense is that competency-based education is how Indigenous populations have always handled education. And I shared this story many meetings ago about when I was 5 or 6, my mother taught me how to pick mushrooms. And we would pick mushrooms in the morning because by afternoon, the mushrooms that I learned to pick were pink underneath, and you didn't pick the white ones because they were poisonous. But by the time the sun was up and warm in the sky, they all turned brown, so you didn't know which ones were poisonous and which ones weren't. Now, as a 5 or 6 year old, I learned that you only pick the pink ones in the morning, and because it could kill you or your family if you pick the wrong ones. I used that as an example of competency-based education. That you have to instill that skill for living in that competency-based education. Now, I'm sure that my mother went through the basket when I got home to make sure I didn't pick any of the wrong ones. But my sense is that if we simply educate to people sitting in the seat, we are wasting a whole lot of resources. That we really should move people into the next tougher level of learning, and perhaps into the next level to where they're contributing to the learning of others because they've already developed the competencies. And I think in many classrooms that's done in a kind of a backhanded way. So I really encourage that we pursue this further, and thank you for your.
Sure, Russ, it's you. You just prompted a bunch of new thoughts, but I'd be interested at some point, maybe not today, but some executive director Cannon could talk to us about. So, what is it? Is there a dialogue amongst state directors of higher education on this issue for the ones I'm involved with, which are state, national level and community colleges, and then also national level on accreditation conversations? There's great interest in competency models and prior learning. You mentioned one population, the other population is people who come out of the military and have developed skills, really great skills. And how do we do something like that? I just, great opportunities there. The questions that I think it raises, which is really sort of foundational to the way in which we design higher ed, is we made assumptions about how we package competencies into courses and programs. And now we're starting to say, well, maybe there's different ways of thinking about competency. Maybe this whole thing can be disaggregated into sets of discrete competencies, and then ask, what's the point of a program? And so I think there's a real important conversation to have there. But it creates some really great opportunities if you could, instead of saying, well, we have to pack enough competencies into a thing to call it a course that lasts 11 weeks. That's why. And I think those are really important conversations that I think we as a commission have a great opportunity. I think competency-based learning has that. I mean, it's squishy, and is that the technical term you use? Squishy? I don't know.
Fringy.
Okay, I'm sorry. There are synonyms of sorts. I mean, there's challenges there. There's real possibilities of losing the veracity of teaching and learning. But there's also a great opportunity there, and I just think I really appreciate the update, and I appreciate being reminded why the legislature did in the first place, because I forgot. And I don't think we should assume that our way of addressing it is limited by their original intent.
Commissioner
Edwards.
Okay. Commissioner Devlin, then Commissioner Edwards.
Mr. Chairman, talk about going to the legislature and asking what their feelings were about this. I nothing from the past. I don't want to speak in any way that this is negative towards the person. The person did a lot of good things also. But I've always remarked that I spent about a decade working with the Education Act for the 21st century. That was from Vera Katz, that basically came from a report from a conference that she saw, and then she incorporated it almost word for word into legislation, which literally governed public education for, I think, about a decade. And, it had the underlying, for those of you who remember, SIMCAM, which I once wanted to label the diploma of initial mastery, diploma of that advanced mastery, dim down. But it wasn't very well thought out. And I think we would be best off in this competency-based education to become a resource to the legislature in terms of best practices, and to be able to point out, where we may be able to make strides in that area, where there are issues that people should be aware of before they put anything in statute, but they don't know the full implications of that. Because this clearly, I can't begin to tell you the issues that this caused that decade. I think it was well intentioned, but it never really was based on very much that was very solid in terms of providing a good public education to children.
Commissioner Edwards.
I'm just curious why it's fringy.
I use the term, and there may be I'm sure there are better terms, and there are probably other opinions. I guess I would say that because if you take competency-based education seriously, you have to pretty dramatically restructure how your institution is organized, how schedules are established, how faculty instruct. I mean, it has enormous, and assess, it has enormous implications for the actual work of teaching. And those are big projects to undertake. And even institutional leaders or individual faculty who are excited about this and have sort of tried to move it forward, I think have often had to come to terms with the fact that they're operating within a larger structure and system, including state policy, and we talked about funding, that makes it hard to do this, right? I mean, again, taken seriously, I mean, or taken, I don't want to say to the extreme, because I think to be faithful with the core premises of competency-based education means a highly individualized, including individually paced set of sort of learning experiences for students. And that's a very different model. That's just one implication, but that's a very different model for teaching and learning. It's why I think credit for prior learning, which shares some of the same sort of spirit, but is from a structural standpoint is itself very hard, I think, and there are barriers, but easier to do because it's looking at a student at the point of entry and assessing their skills and attempting to identify, oh, look, when they were in the military, for example, they learned to do X, Y, and Z. Those are the same things that students in our 101 course learn to do. So we'll give them credit for 101, but it doesn't mean changing how you teach 102. Right? You don't have to change how you schedule your institution, how you use faculty time, how students use their time. You carry on. It's different in terms of awarding them credit for things they brought with them, but it doesn't actually have to disrupt the functioning of the institution. So that's my sense of why it's fringy, but again, I'm sure there are other perspectives on that.
Well, it's not. If it's not necessarily a case of no demand, that it's more about big structural factors like the amount of time it takes to really get to know a student and to be able to prove competency and individual learning. What conditions does it make sense to resource this?
Helen, is that a question for our panel? Is that or is that
It's a question for anyone who wants to answer it.
it's a rhetorical question?
Well, I think it is important, but in the sense that we've got activities and work and people devoted to it and people that have been devoted to it and anything else that's sort of required. But it just sounds like something that if you kind of got to really know how to make it successful. Like, I'm not sure what the point is if it's structurally like just really nailing exactly the scale and the scope and the objectives that are required now.
Well, and I do think that higher education, the way higher education is structured currently is a cultural phenomenon, and that it's, to answer the question about why is it fringy, it's fringy in the same way that Evergreen and Antioch and Reed College are fringy.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting I'm not actually, I don't have a negative bias at all. I've had personal experience with this, and it's a lifesaver for the right kids / adults. And so I'm really positive it, but I'm really cautious about, like, if you're going to do it, you've got to really do it properly, which seems like, it's matching the resource and making sure that that if it's truly able to be successful, that we're able to actually show that in the conditions under which it's successful and why we value it. Because it would be, personally, I think wouldn't it be wonderful to restructure everything around this for anyone who ever wanted it? But when you've got teachers that say it takes, one quote was like 10,000 times more effort to take a student through. I'm thinking high school here, not higher ed. But that sort of leaves you with a conundrum. You're kind of stuck. And I'm more interested in how can we make this something that is right sized, successful, get the right outcomes that we need, and show success and conditions of success and who's successful in it, both teachers, both on the supply side and on the demand side, without sort of setting unrealistic expectations or setting something up for failure, because that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum if you don't focus on what we'd really want to do.
And part of my reason for mentioning the schools I did is I think there's others who've been down this road that we could learn from in our process. So Commissioner Simnett and then Commissioner Rojas Galan.
I just wanted to comment on I would really hope that we could have continued our discussions about how to open up how we think about what counts as or what gets credit in higher education. Because in my own experience, in my limited setting, it's something that I have come up against again and again as a structure that the 11-week course is the only way that you can students can get credit for learning when there's so many other things that they are doing or that they could be doing. So I would just really welcome a discussion to think more about competency-based credit for prior learning, experiential learning, what that might mean in terms of structures, and to recognize that this isn't something that we're going to be implementing in 2023, but like as part of conversations about the changing nature of the landscape as demographic shift and with other students to have multiple pathways and other choices, that we just continue to make this flexibility more a part of our conversations going forward.
Commissioner Rojas Galan.
Yes, thank you, Chair Cross. A couple of items that come to my mind as several people have been speaking, and why not? I could see some of this working with the credit for prior learning, to plug in elective credits. I mean, I think there's a room for that to take place for let's say a 2-year degree. The example I'll share with everybody is my daughter is 20. Yesterday, she beat out about 16 people, some of them with 4-year degrees. My daughter has taken 12 credits at Clatsop Community College. She was an intern and completed about almost 500 hours. 40 of those hours were paid. Against my wishes, I wanted her to earn a degree first. She starts a full-time job at One World Trade Center Monday morning at 10 a.m. without a degree, a college degree, based on her experience of working for a magazine, the magazine specifically in New York City. And Monday morning, she starts with a full-time position. I'm hearing more of that taking place. I'm reading more of that taking place. Not in great numbers, but for somebody, in this case, like my daughter, who completed 450 hours of work as an assistant to the director of fashion to a magazine, I would say that, that experience is what got her job, her position, also her communication skills. I know she was involved in singing and theater, and she communicates very effectively, quite well. But I do see room for, it's going to take time. It's going to take an advisor and a registrar in some cases, sitting down with an individual and, oh, you've done this work for 5 years or what have you, because at the community college level, the median age of students might be 28, 29. I'm not sure today, but it's going to take work. But I think this is something worth at least researching and keeping an eye on.
Sorry, I mean, I just want to say I really appreciate the excitement around continuing the conversation to think about what higher education needs to be to really not only serve these students, but to make sure that we're having effective engagement in civil ways once these students leave school. And I kind of forgot where I was going with this because I had this thought like 10 minutes ago, but no, so one of the, I heard a lot of conversation about success today and measuring success in different ways, kind of at the, the entry point of looking at this competency-based education. But I think we also, we with Ben's presentation about success and measuring outcomes, there's just a small correlate between these two ideas. If we start from a place of talking about success in a way where then we can frame education around it, maybe that'll help us shift some paradigms around competency. And certainly, like I said, I'm extremely excited to continue conversations as a commission.
Well, I think we have one more item. Donna,
Yeah, thank you, Chair Cross. As Executive Director Cannon mentioned earlier, I'm going to provide a brief update on our Bachelor's of Applied Science. Do you want to speak away?
I will speak.
Okay. To our Bachelor's of Applied Science approval process. And it's actually a result of feedback that we have received from some of our institutional partners. That's right, anyway, is it up there? Oh, look at that. Here we are. So next slide, please. So you may remember, as Chair Cross mentioned earlier today, we have a 3-phase process with time between phase 1 and phase 2 for institutional collaboration and communication. And Cindy Roberts earlier today during her public testimony talked a little bit about what kinds of conversations happen during that 90-day period. This process is supported by a 6-person team that represents cross-office collaboration now between CCWD and the Office of Academic Planning and Academic Policy and Authorization. We will maintain this 3-phase approach, but with a couple of adjustments related to commission formal action. So what does that really mean? Next slide, please. So the change here is we will not be asking the commission for action as part of phase 1. But what we will do is ensure that the commission and our partners receive information via your board packet or commission docket as you have in the past. But it'll just be an informational item only for you. The 90-day waiting period, which is specifically designed to allow for engagement between the institutions, will begin on the day in which the commission meets. And so that timeline is still the same as previously. Engagement between the proposing institution and others during that 90-day waiting period can take a variety of forms, including but not limited to things such as phone calls, emails, or even requested presentations to institutional leadership should a group such as the University Statewide Provost Council want a presentation during that 90-day waiting period to learn more about what's being proposed. Next slide, please. Just as with phase 2, the change here is that we're also not going to ask for commission action, but we will once again ensure the commission and our partners receive the information via your commission packet. And as you have in the past, you'll receive that documentation as part of your packet. This step is also where we require an overview of the 90-day waiting period and the steps that were taken to address concerns that may have been raised. So the proposing institution sends us documentation, the staff documentation of what issues were raised by whom during that 90-day waiting period and what were the steps taken to address those needs. So or those concerns or requests. So for instance, in the case of the Lane Community College proposal, when we enter into the program proposal stage and they send their packet, we will see an overview of the conversations that have happened between them and the Alliance. Next slide, please. Phase 3, there's no change in this phase. Just as the commission has done with Chemeketa and Mount Hood's Bachelor's of Applied Science programs earlier this year, we will continue to bring forward the final program submission for your approval. Should the commission then grant approval, the college will then be allowed to confer the Bachelor's of Applied Science degree associated with the submitted program. Next slide, please. I don't think that's it. There it is. Thank you. So just as a quick recap, the commission will continue to receive 2 updates on the Bachelor's of Applied Science degrees prior to the approval request. So you'll still have 3 times in which you'll receive information. The 90-day waiting period is a time for communication, collaboration, and coordination. We're really focusing on that communication and collaboration taking center stage during that 90-day waiting period. It's an opportunity to really form strong partnerships where appropriate and provide advice, feedback, guidance between the institutions. And then the commission will maintain its final authorization and approval as part of this shift. And that's really all I have to share with you, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions, Commissioner Hayden?
All right. One really quick, where does regional accreditation of the program fall in this timeline?
Oh, yes. So the regional accreditation will take place after the program is approved.
Any other questions? I have a question. Is this the initial step? Are you saying that inclusion in our packet constitutes like a notice that this is happening?
Yes. So it will serve as the official public notification that a program has submitted a statement of need. It has been reviewed on the commission's behalf by staff, and staff are in the process of moving that institution into the 90-day waiting period.
I thought of concern, and I think one of the things that happened either with the current situation or one before is that it got past people. And I want to make sure that we don't get in the position of having to play catch up. So I'm not sure how to solve that, how to get it in front of people.
Chair Cross, we've actually come up with a solution for that. So when the statement of need is actually sent to Guthrie for posting and notification as part of your packet, we will also be forwarding that information to the statewide provost council, to the chief academic officers, and also the Alliance and the private for-profit institutions.
And what about the community college?
Yeah, that'll happen through the chief academic officers of the community college.
I just want to make sure that we really notify the right people so that that it's transparent, no surprises is that we strive for.
Yeah, that's what we are hoping to achieve by adding in a few of these additional steps that I just described.
Thank you. Commissioner Day.
Really quick. You said private for-profit, you would notify private nonprofit also?
Yes, the Alliance, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Devlin, for that clarification.
And are there any other questions? Any other questions online? See that we are at our time of 4:30. Have we I think we hit it just about on the money. So I declare that we are in recess until tomorrow. At dinner, Bethany, do we have, you don't have any comment about dinner?
Yes, let me just end the meeting online for our folks. Thanks, everybody, as well as especially for your patience with the poor quality of the cinematography. We'll be working on improving that. No Academy Award for you.